Hey, what's going on, guys? It's your boy Yoloswaggleton here, and yes, I'm insane enough to finally do it. Today I will be defending the extremely controversial Batman vs Superman: Dawn of Justice. This is completely my opinion. Feel free to make any counterclaims or feedback, and let me know why you think Batman vs Superman might be a complete shit show. Now for a bit of context. Batman vs Superman is the movie that often makes my opinion invalid to several people because of how much I praise this movie. I'm sure you know how much people hate this movie, unless you've been living under a rock. Therefore, I'll only be addressing people's arguments as a gateway to form a counter-argument, rather than explain why this point is made in the first place, as that would be self-defeating. Over the past 3 years, I've constantly been challenged by my friends and peers to explain why I love this movie so much, but a top-of-my-head explanation simply hasn't done it justice. Get it, justice? I'm very funny, because it's a pun. I really want to go in depth with as much detail and explanation as possible to hopefully make my point of view easier to interpret and understand. It's going to be a long video, but please bear with me. My goal by the end of this is not to persuade you to love Batman vs Superman, but to reevaluate your own opinion and confirm you are 100% confident in your own opinion. Did you misjudge the film? Did you hop on a bandwagon of hatred? Do you still not find my statements valid? Those questions are purely for you to ask yourself by the end of the video. Let's begin. Batman vs Superman: Dawn of Justice is a comic book-inspired film starring Ben Affleck, Henry Cavill, Jesse Eisenberg, and Gal Gadot, directed by Zack Snyder and released on March 25th, 2016. Several trailers were released within the year of 2015 that were welcomed with a positively strong public opinion. Before media acknowledged this film as a controversial mess, the public was electrified with hype for this film as it was a Kickstarter for the DC Extended Universe, or currently known as DC Films. The only criticism at the time was doubt that Ben Affleck would be able to accurately portray the Cape Crusader. Public opinion took a turn for the worse when Rotten Tomatoes scored Batman vs Superman a 27%, with many forming their opinion on the movie before even seeing it. I'll be addressing the Rotten Tomatoes score later on in the video, before I break down the typical criticisms the movie received. I find it much more appropriate to analyze the film for its objective uniqueness, which is what I will be breaking down into chapters right now. Batman vs Superman distances itself from the well-established MCU formula in order to prevent oversaturation of the hero genre and create a refreshing viewer experience. Batman vs Superman is a social commentary more than anything, questioning how the public would react to the Superman. How would people's fears play into how he is judged? How would the media skew the event in favor of xenophobia? How irrational would powerful figures who have a say in the situation behave? Lastly, why is the perspective so problematic? Batman vs Superman separates itself from the common hero versus villain formula in the sense that it's really a film that pits hero versus hero and God versus man. This premise is successfully accomplished while still remaining loyal to the character's comic book roots. It is a comic book movie, but takes a much more grounded approach to how the public would factor into a superhero story. Let's test this idea with Marvel's The Avengers. Is it realistic that the heroes cause mass collateral damage without receiving any real consequence, regardless of whether or not they were the quote-unquote good guys in the situation? Humans are prideful, loving, and very irrational, which makes it much more plausible that Superman would receive backlash from causing loved ones to die, regardless of his position in the fight.
Bruce Wayne meets Clark Kent. I love it.
There's quite a lot to unpack with the topic of characterization in Batman vs Superman. Truthfully, this is where most of the people interpret the purpose of the film, which is why I'll be dedicating some more of this topic in the symbols category and a whole discussion in the criticism category. Snyder makes a point to question morals and integrity of characters throughout Batman vs Superman, most notably Batman. This character suffers a very apparent criticism due to the fact that he kills people and is believed to make a total 180 during the Superman fight. Although this character is heavily misunderstood, I'll be covering it for a majority of this video in the criticism section. But to leave a sour taste in your mouth while you wait, let's not forget that Bale did this. Let's talk Superman. Superman has one of the most admirable character struggles, as the controversy around his introduction to Earth makes him question if he's even good enough to protect this Earth, if he can even fulfill his destiny. He's at an all-time low after being forced to kill General Zod in Man of Steel, and blames himself for being responsible for someone's death regardless of his intent to save other people. With the public hating him for killing several people through collateral damage, he feels even more guilty and believes he isn't good enough to use his incredible gifts for good, like his parents raised him. An important note about this character is that the public considering Superman as a god throughout the movie. with Lex making an impactful statement in "If God is all good, then he can't be all powerful." This does correlate to Superman's struggles as his motives are pure, but it is simply impossible for him to save everyone. However, it's important to recognize that Superman is no god. Gods are associated with flawlessness, which influences the public to believe that the deaths caused by Superman were in his control. But what makes Superman, well, Superman, is his surprisingly human qualities with these powers. He makes mistakes, feels guilt, is not all-powerful because he is in fact all good, and loves. Many suggest Lois is pointless in this movie, but an important role she plays is providing Clark the humanistic quality of loving a woman, which in a Christian perspective, women represent earthly good, which reinforces Clark's human qualities. I should also extremely emphasize the fact that there is a lot of Christian influence in Zack Snyder's films, which I'll later discuss in the symbols category. Rather than critics of this film admitting that they can't just adjust to a more grounded and flawed Superman, they base their comparison on another great Superman, Christopher Reeve. But that campy Boy Scott Superman just wouldn't work for a movie trying to achieve complex social commentary and struggles of morality. Now let's talk Lex Luthor, the antagonist of this film. His motivation is simple to understand and execute in a complex fashion, just like the Luthor character naturally would. Being the most powerful man on the planet and wanting the world to view him as a hero figure, he plots to kill Superman using the three failsafes of Batman, kidnapping his mother, and using Doomsday. He achieves this by psychologically toying with Batman to fuel his anger. People may say this doesn't seem like an accurate portrayal of Batman to be used so easily, but the audience should keep in mind that this Batman is a broken hero plagued with guilt for letting Jason Todd die. Also, it's well established in comics that Batman has a mental soft spot for feeling responsible for his parents' death. Lex being the genius he is also put together that Bruce is Batman and Clark is Superman due to clues he had when meeting them both at the party. Having over 200 IQ, I'm sure he had reasonable suspicion these two figures were hiding something. Such clues included Clark's grip strength and Batman snooping around the party for intel, as Mercy Graves witnessed. A lot of people say that this doesn't at all resemble the comic Lex Luthor and is much more of a Riddler. And I'd hate to sound like a know-it-all, but I'd agree that this isn't like Lex Luthor in the comics, because it isn't that Lex Luthor. They make it clear in the movie that this is Lex Luthor Jr., after Jr. describes Senior's upbringing. This portrayal of Lex Jr. is extremely accurate, in fact. A great example is the comic Superman Birthright. Everything from the look to his personality is completely accurate to the used source material. As far as the Riddler comparison, I find it difficult to understand. Is it because both characters are smart? Is it because they both speak very cryptically? Perhaps the mannerisms are very similar. Lex is prideful of his superior intellect over the common person and wouldn't dumb down his manner of speaking in order to sound more natural. In fact, Lex's characterization supports that he doesn't want to associate with simple-minded people like the scene with the Jolly Rancher. He makes specific requests and doesn't expect anyone to understand why he'd make such requests. Therefore, he is visibly mocking and talks down to everyone he sees in Batman vs Superman when he isn't just manipulating them.
You're psychotic.
That is a three-syllable word for any thought too big for little mind.
Symbols and illusions in film support certain ideas or themes without requiring to make it a point to acknowledge the symbol or illusion in question. It's objectively a very artistic way to enforce a certain concept within a movie, but of course I'm aware that inflating a film with symbols doesn't necessarily make it good. However, it's a strong indication that a lot of thought was put into the movie when symbols are present. In the case of Batman vs Superman, the symbols just work so cohesively that foreshadows certain events of the movie unconsciously or alludes to other media that can apply to the film. For example, when walking out of the theater, the two plays Zorro and Excalibur can be seen. Not only does the allusion to Zorro make for a cool comic reference, but it foreshadows the branding that Batman does to criminals similarly to how Zorro carves Z's into his opponent's chest. This can play into Bruce's childhood psychology that seeing this play at an early age influences his branding, and oh my god, he did it on the chest. Excalibur also adds symbolism as it serves as the foundation of the film's plot. Superman and Batman functioning as Arthur and Lancelot, the spear in the ground mirroring the sword in the stone, Lois jumping into the river to recover the spear reflecting the lady in the lake, and Doomsday as Mordred. Now I know you want to consider this observation a stretch, but Mordred does stab Arthur in the back just like how Doomsday did to Superman. It's simply thoughtful writing and symbolism. As I mentioned before, Christian symbolism and allusion is quite literally everywhere in Batman vs. Superman, boiling down to numbers on buildings referring to Bible scriptures that are relevant to the scene the number appears in. The very first one is seen on a building as the Waynes walk out the theater. Now, I don't feel the need to cover all these Christian symbols as the length of this video would triple, which already sounds like a nightmare. But as I cover one of these symbols, just recognize that Batman vs. Superman has major Christian influence thanks to the vision of Zack Snyder and Chris Terrio, the screenwriter. Let's talk about the painting. One of the most important scenes in all of Batman vs. Superman is the interaction Lex Luthor has with Senator Finch. Not only does this justify Lex's xenophobia, which is a commentary of post-American 9/11, but it explains two interpretations of the current situation with Superman. The painting is completely unique to Batman vs. Superman and depicts the war in heaven from the Book of Revelations. Completely unaltered, this painting represents the objective views of Batman vs. Superman. Superman, who comes from the sky, is representative of the savior figure, implying that this would make Batman the demon figure, who dwells in a cave as a metaphor for hell, commonly believed being underground. Essentially, the war in heaven is a reflection of the story of Batman vs. Superman. However, Lex suggests that the painting is actually upside down, as he justifies that devils don't come from hell beneath us, they come from the sky. In this interpretation, Lex implies that Batman would actually be the savior figure and he tries to slay the demon, Superman. This interpretation still works because the angel comes from the underground and the devil comes from the sky. Xenophobia plays a major role throughout the movie and serves as political and social commentary where Superman is dehumanized, just like the title card Mankind is introduced to the Superman, where, quote, the Superman, unquote, makes the character seem more like an abstract concept than a living individual. Also, a quick thing that people pointed out about the painting recently is the Darkseid's Omega symbol is visible when turned in Lex's interpretation, which is another cool detail in my opinion. Alright, welcome everybody to the quick round. Things that people really don't criticize in the movie but deserve much more credit include the visual effects, the costume design, the acting, the soundtrack, and the fight choreography. It's really perplexing to say a movie is bad based off certain criteria, but choose to ignore elements of a movie that are objectively great with subjective opinions. Besides, I've never heard anyone question Hans Zimmer's work on any movie. Here are some other criticisms. Quote, the CGI is bad, unquote. This is an extremely subjective opinion that can have objective truth to it in comparison to other uses of CGI in film. When this statement is made, I assume most people refer to Doomsday as CGI in this movie, as CGI isn't quite as apparent in comparison to other comic book movies like Green Lantern. So let's settle this on the middle ground that Doomsday CGI is somewhere between this great CGI and this bad CGI. I would personally say this is a fair judgment and the best way to scale if CGI is good or bad in an objective point of view. In this case, Doomsday CGI would be, from a minimalist perspective, okay, and from an optimist perspective, pretty good. Therefore, I really don't believe that Doomsday CGI is bad, but comic accurate is a different story. Which leads me to my next criticism. Quote, Doomsday doesn't look like Doomsday. Unquote. This is a statement that can be countered by movie and comic book lore. This Doomsday was created by Lex, whereas the comic Doomsday is an ancient Kryptonian. So would this qualify as the Doomsday that we are used to? The way I interpret this Doomsday is as a precursor to a real Doomsday used later in another movie. Just to showcase how powerful an unevolved Doomsday could be versus an evolved one. We can also see Doomsday evolve in the movie with more bone spikes, slowly resembling a more traditional look and giving more potential. Quote, Superman died too early, unquote. This really depends based off your standards of dying too early. Spider-Man also died after his first solo movie in the universe, like Superman. They both also came back to movies later. Saying Superman died too early but Spider-Man did not is a double standard. This point can't really be argued as it is entirely opinionated. If you agree Spider-Man died too early, then based on your criteria, it's fair enough to say the same for Superman. If you don't think Spider-Man died too early, then it's simply hypocritical to believe Superman did. Quote, BVS is boring, unquote. This is another entirely opinionated claim that can't really be argued. I disagree, as BVS, in my opinion, has good pacing with plenty of action in the beginning, a lot of exposition in the middle and a little bit of action in the middle, and a rewarding climax in the end. But I wouldn't go as far as to say that it can't be boring. Exposition is always something necessary in a movie that's extremely hard to make entertaining. Perhaps the review swayed your initial opinion to want to not enjoy this movie and kind of already was bored. Regardless, this point is just your opinion, and there's no real way of convincing you if you thought this was boring. Characters' motivations are confusing. This isn't a criticism that I've explained already for many characters, but I'll discuss Batman shortly. I'd honestly say this criticism is common due to a vast misinterpretation of their motivations in the first place. Alright, let's get into what you're all waiting for. Alright, let's agree on one thing right off the bat. Get it? I'm so funny. This interpretation of The Dark Knight is a total adaptation of Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns. Fair enough, right? For the first 2 years of Batman comics, Batman carried a gun and killed people for a 2-year run. Although this garnered a lot of attention for the character, the killing was soon requested to be censored. To remedy this, DC made the no killing and no guns rule to keep in line with terms placed on them. For a while, Batman was no longer this ruthless character and was more or less considered a kid-friendly for a while. It wasn't until the 70s where slightly darker storylines were explored. In the 1980s, Frank Miller wanted a return to form for the character, making him more brutal and violent than ever.
Dark Knight was really an attempt to take it back a lot in terms of its the basic meat of the material, and at the same time bring it forward in terms of the world it lives in and the kind of fiction that you can do now. I really enjoyed the idea of making him as old as his legend is, and letting it be a cranky old legend. This ravenous old hero. I wanted to bring back that hearty sense of malice that he had back in his origins.
In many ways, this comic was revolutionary for the Batman character, eventually shaping into the aggressive vigilante we know today. The Frank Miller Batman really didn't go out of his way to kill anyone, but took on the devil-may-care attitude towards criminals where their health was concerned. The only arguable person that Miller's Batman killed directly was the Joker. However, there were several deaths caused by proxy in The Dark Knight Returns. It's bizarre that people love this Batman and consider this adaptation one of his greatest, but believe Affleck's Batman is completely out of character when Zack essentially achieved the same thing.
I tried to do it like by proxy. He'd shoot the car that they're in, the car would blow up, or the grenade would go off in the guy's hand or whatever. Or he'd shoot the tank of the thing, and the guy pretty much lights his own tank with the thing. So I perceive it as not him killing directly, but by sort of, if the bad guys are associated with the thing that happens to blow up, that's not really. He would say that that's not really my problem. Like they shouldn't have been around that.
Now that we've gotten the Dark Knight Returns inspiration out of the way, let's discuss the biggest misinterpretation of Batman's character. I'm going to throw up a quote on the screen right now that is probably the most important thing to know about the Batman's character that most people don't understand conceptually. Quote, "Batman is not supposed to be seen as morally justified in his actions," unquote, by Yoloswaggleton. If it wasn't clear, Batman is the villain of the movie, or rather the antagonist, because the statement would contradict my statement that it doesn't follow the hero versus villain formula, which it still doesn't, but villain is much simpler to understand than a tragic hero. Anyway, he is depicted as the demon on the painting, he kills people by proxy, he takes the role as the tragic hero as popularized by Greek theater. He is broken. Batman killing wasn't meant to imply killing is a heroic thing. Batman is tired and broken after Jason's death, and over time evolved into a ruthless vigilante. People will suggest becoming ruthless isn't like the character, but it's only been done so many times already to easily make a counterclaim. I'd also argue that Batman retiring in Dark Knight Rises wasn't resembling the character, as it implies he's a quitter, but it makes sense story-wise, and I believe room should be made to transform a character and do something new. Which Batman retiring was done in Nightfall, but so was becoming ruthless in Returns. So the main point is, Batman should not be seen as the hero character. In fact, it should be obvious by the fact that even Batman himself acknowledges he's a criminal in the movie. Which, should I mention, is also like the character in the sense that vigilantes are criminals under all circumstances. With this in mind, let's talk about the controversial Martha scene. If it wasn't clear, Batman doesn't refuse to kill Superman because their mothers share the same name. Rather, this acts as a gateway for Batman to come to the realization that he is not only destroying a family, but killing someone who is much more human than he anticipated, referring to the abstract ideology of the Superman. At this point, Batman realizes he's gone too far and has become the person who killed his parents. He becomes, in a sense, Joe Chill. Him refusing to kill Superman after doesn't forgive Batman for what he's done. It doesn't stop him from being compared to Joe Chill, but it's an essential character development to show Batman's growth. It's not a complete 180 either. Batman doesn't just grow a moral compass from thin air. In fact, it's much more natural that he continues to kill people right after this fight in the warehouse scene because it's what he's used to. But the Martha scene serves as the initial realization that Batman needs to change, which you see months later when he spares Deadshot and doesn't want to brutalize him in front of his daughter. Room for growth. If you made it this far, I want to say thank you so much for hearing me out. I've defended this movie tremendously, but I want to say that it's not perfect. The theatrical cut makes the bullet subplot go absolutely nowhere, which is later resolved in the ultimate cut, which introduces Jeanette Clyburn as the remedy for this problem. But I hope you can reconsider how you view this movie and realize the unjustified hate it's received for a movie so artistically impressive. So tell me what you think in the comments. I'd love to hear if this video influenced your opinion. Did it convince you? Or however you reacted to this. Alright guys, this has been Yoloswaggleton, and peace.